the great futurists George Gilder and Paul Saffo. Please welcome them.
Hi, Paul.
This is such a treat. And it is extant in as follows. George and I originally were going to be interviewed by a moderator, and the moderator skipped out, which I thought was great because it gives us more time to hear George's ideas. And so this is kind of a conversation, and if you will forgive me, I will try and sort of kind of pinch hit as a moderator.
Okay.
Yes.
And as a futurist.
And as a futurist, yes, what can I say?
And as a historian, I can be the historian.
Yes. Well, of course,
you've got my book of Silicon Valley history there.
Yes,
so.
I was, when I knew that George and I were going to be on stage together, how many people in this room read Microcosm? A few of you will, I mean, you have to, this was a book that was published in 1989. It was quite extraordinary, and I took the liberty of reading through much of it over the last weekend, and it's amazing how well it has held up. You know, I'm sure people tell you that all the time.
It's the same microchip industry, and the same rules apply. And
yeah. So I suspect we both look at the world in very similar ways, and we have similar thoughts. I have a feeling we have very different opinions about what should be done in response, and I hope we get to that. But
okay.
Let's just start with this idea of power. You heard Dave Blakely, I thought, put it very nicely about how power is diffusing outwards. As you look out on the global landscape the next 10 years or so, what associates with the word power for you?
Well, I think the key point is whether power is aligned with knowledge, because power without knowledge is noise, or even
folly,
or worse.
Yes.
And the thing about knowledge is that it's distributed in all our heads. Each of us has unique insights, unique experience, unique talents, unique perspectives, skills, while power tends to be homogeneous and tends to migrate toward the guns, toward the center. And what makes economies work is when power is aligned with knowledge. And that's the real theme of my book, Knowledge and Power, that you have to disperse power as widely as knowledge is dispersed in order to have a dynamic and successful economy.
What are moments in history that you would point to where knowledge and power, examples where knowledge and power really have aligned in positive ways?
Well, I certainly think Silicon Valley, when
I thought you were going to say Larry Ellison yesterday, but yeah.
But also I think after World War II, the immediate post-World War II era is an important time. It was 1946.
Bretton Woods.
Yeah, Bretton Woods.
An extraordinary moment in history.
It was an extraordinary moment in history. But more important, actually, than Bretton Woods as it happened, although Bretton Woods was important, was the election of a Republican Congress in 1946.
Okay, so this is where you start the version.
And I thought so. And this Republican Congress...
My hero would have been Keynes, Harry Dexter White.
Well, Keynes was a hero. Harry Dexter White was a communist. And Keynes had to battle Harry Dexter White for every inch. Keynes felt he was surrounded on all sides at Bretton Woods by Americans who were really working for the Soviet Union.
But he prevailed.
That sounds like a preposterous thing, but Sylvia Nasser's wonderful book on the history of economics tells this story brilliantly. But in any case, in 1946, every single Keynesian economist, Hansen, Samuelson, whoever, declared that unless government spending was maintained at wartime levels, the economy would fall into the worst depression and disruption in the history of economics, in the words of Samuelson. Well, instead, they elected a Republican Congress in 1946 and reduced government spending 61%. They laid off 150,000 government regulators. They dismantled much of the New Deal apparatus and all the wartime price controls. They laid off 1 million government workers. And everybody predicted catastrophe. Instead, we launched a 10-year economic boom that we now look back on as some kind of golden era for the U.S. economy. The idea that government spending does anything to promote economic growth. Government spending is exercising power as a substitute for knowledge. And it displaces the knowledgeable actions of entrepreneurs that drive all economic growth.
So, I mean, Bretton Woods was an extraordinary moment, and it laid the foundations for what became the global economic order. Yeah. And it created the great institutions of the post-war era, the IMF. Eventually, we'd see IMF, NATO. It was that environment. If it was an age, it was an age of large international institutions. Were those a positive force in that decade?
Yes, they were a very positive force. In Knowledge and Power, I apply Shannon's information theory to capitalist economics. And a key theme is it takes a low entropy carrier, a carrier with no surprises, to bear high entropy information. That is, the creations of entrepreneurs in my model. And Bretton Woods established the low entropy carrier of essentially a gold standard, and a gold exchange standard that did supply a foundation for stable monetary relations for decades afterwards, until the 1970s when Nixon went off the gold standard conclusively. And
well, and there was also something else happening in that period. You know, we create this plateau of order, and then the termites start working away. I mean, one could even argue it's a process of punctuated equilibrium, but it was the microprocessor, came in here. We start having the telecommunications revolution, all the things you wrote about in Microcosm.
Right.
The way I see it is that digital technology was the solvent that leached the glue out of those institutions that were created after World War II and thrust us into the world of the 1980s. Is that a fair statement?
That's an interesting insight.
That would be no.
It's not. I'm not. I think that's an. I agree with that. The two key events were the development of the development of this transistor, and the development of information theory simultaneously at Bell Labs. And the two together, at first, when I wrote Microcosm, I assumed that the invention of the transistor was absolutely the most important event in 1948 at Bell Labs. But in retrospect, after spending a couple decades really immersed in information theory, I think that was an equally important contribution by Claude Shannon,
sure,
which really laid the foundations for the
internet
and all the computer and software technology
and
that
the
we
two went
currently
together.
do. And the two did go together.
And I'm always struck by this in history of the remarkable coincidences, because Shannon's essay was published in 1948.
Right.
So it happened right at the same time that Brattain, Bardeen, and Shockley were doing the transistor.
Yeah, right.
And
some people claim that Bardeen suggested to Shannon to call his index of information, which is entropy. And some people believe that it was John von Neumann. Maybe both of them thought Shannon should call it entropy. But entropy is surprisal, it's surprise. And because of that, by basing an economic model on Shannon's information theory, you can have human creativity, entrepreneurial inventiveness at the center of the model rather than patching it in from the outside as all existing economic models have to do. So it allows a completely different way of framing economics and capitalism, not chiefly as an incentive system, system of carrots and sticks or rewards and punishments, that is often depicted with greed somehow contributing to the creation of wealth, but as an information system and a knowledge system whereby all wealth is really knowledge, not merely analogous to knowledge, but wealth is, in fact, knowledge. The process of economic growth is chiefly characterized by learning. So you have learning curves and the accumulation of knowledge as the foundation of economic growth, which we see around us in Silicon Valley.
So let's just go a little more deeply on this knowledge thing. It feels a little macro to me, and Silicon Valley is a very practical place. Yeah. And as a faculty member at Stanford, looking at students paying $50,000 a year to acquire knowledge and then asking questions like, am I going to get a job? Take knowledge down to the individual level.
Oh, well, I do. I don't think what happens at Stanford is an exceptional example of the generation of knowledge. I think knowledge is, as Karl Popper really asserted, requires falsifiability. That's and the crucial generator of knowledge are experimental enterprises that can either succeed or fail. Unlike big endowed leviathans like Stanford, I think entrepreneurial startups epitomize knowledge creators because
let me challenge.
They make falsifiable propositions.
So, I mean,
they can go bankrupt, in other words, as you've probably noticed. Stanford can't.
Oh, I think our president would tell you otherwise. That's why we had a record fundraising year. As you talk, it feels like you're talking about knowledge from the perspective of the pointy tip of the entrepreneurial spear. That it is knowledge that yields rapid results and rapid failures, and we advance. But there are other knowledge systems where things are discovered and their significance of the knowledge is not found for decades later. I mean, the innovations of Silicon Valley were built on the scientific research that was done a decade or two before, and we constantly see this pattern of things moving up. What about that?
That is certainly part of the creation of knowledge, and it is the value of that scientific research does observe the rules of information theory, and it's the unexpected results, it's the surprising developments that constitute the information, which gets processed as knowledge and enters the economy and is transformed into wealth.
Give me an example.
The key thing, Thomas Sowell, who spends a lot of time down at Stanford, is really the greatest intellectual resource of Stanford, wrote Knowledge and Decisions back in 1971, and he pointed out that the Neanderthal in his cave had the same physical appetites and the same natural resources that we have today. The difference between
no Starbucks
us and the Stone Age and Starbucks is entirely the accumulation of knowledge, and all economic transactions are in fact exchanges of differential knowledge.
Sure, I mean, it's quintessential on Wall Street, but Can you give a...
Wall Street is a bad example, actually.
I didn't
when
say
it
it was
was-
a good example, I said it was a quintessential example.
It's when the economic channels fill up with noise, the horizons of the economy shrink, and more of profits accrue to fast trading and financial maneuvers and machinations and
Sure.
Wall Street likes volatility. The more money gyrates and the more volatility there is, the happier Wall Street is. Wall Street wants volatility with the downside protected by government.
And
Silicon Valley wants long-term stability of money and
I think on
property rights, and all, with the upside protected by the rule of law.
right.
And,
No, I think Wall Street's motto is capitalism for the poor and socialism for the rich. But other institutions, again, I'm struck. Thinking back to that period after World War II, and of course, as so many times in American politics, the future was hanging on a razor's edge there in the debate between Keynes and the others. But I also think about the difference in the debate. I mean, back then, in many ways, I think the differences of opinion in Washington were broader than they are today, and yet somehow they managed to carry on a conversation that, at least in retrospect, looks a little more intelligent than the conversation today.
Yeah. Well, I think that this is a great problem. There are two things that really debauch our politics. And one is public opinion polls. Public opinion polls, the reason politicians are so incredibly boring, why you yawn and turn away every time they open their mouths, is because they're trying to tell you what you already know. They've done market surveys, they've taken polls, they try to determine what the audience already thinks, and then they try to tell it to them. And that, under Shannon, is zero entropy communications.
I was thinking in terms of information theory, it's a case of too tight a feedback loop, that politicians are getting such instantaneous, uninformed feedback from the public, they're incapable of...
It's the phantom public, and they're telling the public what they already know. And the definition of a zero entropy communication is me telling you what you already know. The other great big problem of politics is monomania. The campaign finance rules allow PACs, political action committees, which are devoted to a single subject, whether they're corporations or unions or whatever. They can make unlimited contributions in politics. But you and I, individuals with a variety of interests, with a stake in the community, we're only allowed to give $2,000 per campaign.
Well,
this means that our politics is dominated by monomaniacs.
They say the scarcest resource in American politics is a raging moderate. And, or actually, apropos of where we are here at the Churchill Club,
I was always called a raving moderate.
Yes. I think it was Churchill who said the definition of a fanatic is someone who can't change their mind and won't change the subject, and that seems to perfectly define PACs today, regardless of where they are on the spectrum.
Yeah.
Where does it lead? We have about 3 minutes left. What does this intersection of policy and power, innovation, and economics look like in 2025?
Well, the great thing about an economy of mind is that it can change as fast as minds can change. Just as in the example after the Second World War, the example of New Zealand, Israel, other countries that reached the end of the line and were in paralysis, 1,000% inflation in the Israeli case, and everybody turned around and realigned knowledge and power overnight, and economies soared. New Zealand zeroed out its entire, a Labour government in New Zealand in the mid-1980s zeroed out its entire federal budget and went from 23 years of deficits to 17 years of surpluses, from having to import food to abolishing its Department of Agriculture and becoming one of the world's leading, actually the world's leading per capita exporter of agricultural products.
So George, we literally have a minute and a half left. Where, if you look out over the next 10 years, which spot on the planet or which industry you say that's the place that feels like it's poised for one of those big flips, one of those big changes?
I think biotech. We understand now that our bodies are chiefly information platforms rather than chemical and physical agglomerations. And our bodies are programmable increasingly. And so it's increasingly going to be possible to use viruses and other synthetic vectors to actually program the ribosomes or the stem cells in our body to produce the molecules or medicines that we need. And this whole idea of feeding people pills or injecting chemicals in order to attack the body as a chemical and physical entity. We now understand that the body is chiefly a programmable entity, and the universe is not flat, that there are 7 layers of abstraction in information theory and computer science, and our bodies have at least that many. And it's a huge arena for entrepreneurial advance.
I think that's a perfect place to stop. Thank you, George.
Well, thank you.
Let's give George a hand.